A warm welcome to another episode of SciencePunk Explains the Frame Budget Approach.
All right, let's jump right back in. In our last explainer, we talked all about channels, the pathways for exchange across a boundary. But, that immediately raises the next big question. Once you know the pathways, what's actually moving through them? What's being tracked in that exchange? In other words, what is the budget?
So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with what we already know, moving from money to motion. Then we'll nail down what the cost of change really means in this approach. After that, we'll take apart a single step, see the world from a budget's point of view, and wrap up with a little reality check.
All right, first up, from money to motion. Let's start on some familiar ground, because the word budget, well, it probably makes you think of your bank account, right? And honestly, that's the perfect place to start.
Think about it. Whether you realize it or not, we are all accountants, all the time. We track our household finances. Money comes in, money goes out. We count calories. We nervously watch our phone's battery percentage tick down. We keep an eye on the fuel gauge in our car. In every single one of these cases, we're tracking some quantity that is limited and has to be managed. It has to be accounted for.
And here's the kicker. Physics runs on the exact same principle. It's all about accounting. The only real difference is that instead of dollars or calories, we're just tracking different, more fundamental quantities.
The classic example, the big one everyone thinks of is, of course, energy. Physicists are practically obsessed with tracking every last joule of it. Where did it come from? Where did it go? Is it conserved? It's all just balancing the energy books.
And it's not just energy. Take electric charge. The total charge in an isolated system has to stay the same, period. It's another one of these things you have to account for. You can't just create it or destroy it willy-nilly. It has to come from somewhere and go somewhere. So you see, we're already totally comfortable with this idea of budgets in physics, even if we don't always call them that.
Okay, so let's move on. With that foundation, we can now get really specific and look at what a budget means in the frame budget approach.
So here's the official definition. A budget is the accountable aspect of a realized step. Now, I know, that sounds a little dense at first, but let's break it down. The keywords are accountable and step. It's just the bookkeeping for one minimal change. You could think of it as a single tick of something happening. And notice what it is not. It is not some kind of hidden stuff.
And this is so crucial. I want to read this quote directly from the source material. Budget is neither the name of a substance nor an ontological fluid. It's a working word for balanced and mediated state change. We are not, and this is so important, we are not imagining some kind of magical energy juice flowing through invisible pipes. A budget is a way of looking at things, a lens for tracking change.
So if you remember one thing, let it be this. Every single physical change has a cost. Nothing happens for free. And a budget, it is simply the bookkeeping of that cost. That's it. It's a simple idea, but it is incredibly powerful.
Okay, on to section 3. So if a budget is the cost of a step, then the FBA gives us a really neat way to itemize the receipt, so to speak. We can break that cost down into 3 distinct flavors.
Now, whoa, don't let the symbols scare you off. All this equation is saying is that the total change in the budget, that's the thing on the left, can always be accounted for. We can balance the books perfectly by splitting the cost into 3 columns in our ledger: an external part, a reversible internal part, and an irreversible internal part.
So let's unpack that. External change is pretty simple. That's exchanged with the outside world. Then you have internal changes. The reversible kind is like compressing a spring. You put energy in, but you can get it all back out. The irreversible kind, though, that's more like burning a log. Once it's ash, you can't just unburn it to get the log back.
Actually, a really great way to think about that irreversible part is aging. It's a type of internal change that just accumulates. The system gets a little bit older with each step, and you can't just hit rewind. That accumulated, non-refundable cost is what we're tracking in that irreversible column.
All right, section 4. And this, for me, is where it all gets really, really cool. Why bother with all this detailed bookkeeping? Well, because the budget you choose to track fundamentally changes the story you tell about what's happening. It literally changes what you see.
Let's take a super simple example. A hot cup of coffee cooling on your desk. Now, if you track the budget of total energy, you'll see a story of perfect conservation. The energy leaves the coffee, warms up the room, but the total amount in the universe doesn't change one bit. But what if you track a different budget? What if you track useful heat, the heat that can do work? Well, now you see a completely different story.
You see an irreversible loss. That concentrated, useful heat just dissipates into the room and you can't get it back. Same coffee, same room, but two totally different stories just by changing the budget.
So what does this all mean? It means a budget isn't some passive number you just go out and measure. It's an active part of your description of the world. The very act of choosing which budget to track determines what phenomena even become visible to you, whether you see a story of conservation or loss or something else entirely.
Okay, now for a really important, maybe kind of mind-bending point. We've been talking about what we choose to track. But there's one thing we're used to thinking of as always being spent that in the frame budget approach is absolutely not a budget, and that's time.
So if time isn't a resource we spend, what is it? Well, in this view, it's simply the ordering of the steps. It's the sequence. One thing happens, then the next, then the next. That little step number n we saw in the equation. It's just counting the updates. It's not counting seconds. Seconds and minutes are things we build on top of this, not the other way around.
Okay, let's land the plane. Final section, the reality check. Let's pull this all together and see why it matters and where we go from here.
This whole idea that we can choose a budget to tell a certain story, well, it leads to a pretty serious question, right? If we can just pick and choose, how do we know any of this is physically real? How do we know we aren't just playing an accounting game? That's the big question.
So before we wrap up, let's lock in the 3 key takeaways. First, a budget isn't some kind of stuff. It's the cost of a physical change. Second, your choice of budget literally determines the story you see. Is it conservation or is it loss? And third, time isn't a budget we spend. It's just the sequence of those changes.
And that brings us back to that big question. How do we know a budget is real and not just a clever trick? Well, that is the perfect setup for our next explainer, where we will dive right into that. We're going to explore how we make sure these budgets are physically robust by digging into the idea of an operational definition. Bye for now, until the next episode, and stay curious.